I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. My professional is David Drucker of the Washington Examiner. He's in D.C., nation's capital. And John Fund of the National Review Online, traveling. I believe he's on the West Coast. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. I begin with your report, David. There is a primary, Senate primary, open seat in Oklahoma within these next hours for the Republican Party. The former Oklahoma House Speaker, T.W. Shannon, and Congressman James Lankford. At this point, David, the story seems to involve the Tea Party, but I think the tea is everywhere. Everybody's got a teacup on his lap. What's happening, David? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. It's an interesting race. Lankford and Shannon are pretty evenly matched. They're both sitting politicians. Lankford is thought of as smart and capable. Shannon is charismatic and up and coming. He's worked for a couple of congressmen in his career. And it's really not so much who's more conservative, but it's who do you like. And the undercurrent here is that the national Tea Party groups have all thrown in for T.W. Shannon. Nothing wrong with that. They think he's a Washington outsider. He'll shake things up. He's also African-American and charismatic, and I think, there's probably a sense that he's something the Republican Party could use in terms of some diversity. But the Oklahoma Tea Party groups are mad at the national Tea Party groups, as well as Sarah Palin and Ted Cruz and others, for meddling in their affairs and telling them who the real conservative is there without consulting them. And what I found interesting about this, and what I write in a story that'll hit the WashingtonExaminer.com in the morning, is that, for years, the grassroots and the Tea Party groups in Washington have complained that the Republican Party is busy meddling in primaries and should leave that to the locals. And now they're doing the same thing they've been complaining about. It's just one establishment replacing another, so to speak, and that's been an interesting development to watch in this race.
Mr. Fund, a very good evening to you. Mississippi. Haley Barbour runs Mississippi. He's also a national Republican player. But tomorrow, it looks like Thad Cochran against a natural campaigner, State Senator Mr. McDaniel. The concern I see on Twitter, the Tea Party backing Mr. McDaniel and others, seem to be concerned that Haley Barbour has tricks that they can't beat. What tricks, John?
Well, enormous amounts of money pouring in from the K Street lobbying community in Washington. In addition, some of that money being channeled as walking around money to black pastors and ministers to encourage their congregations to, for once, vote in a Republican primary to save an aged Republican senator.
So right now, the opinion is nobody can call the race because McDaniel is such a magical campaigner, John. It's hard to believe that Haley Barbour's that good to overcome McDaniel's strength.
Cochran is below 50%, which is a danger signal for any incumbent. However, this is a very low turnout primary.
Right.
So if there were a surge of last-minute voters, mainly Democrats, crossing over and voting in the Republican primary, there could be an upset.
David, you reported on this when you traveled to Mississippi. Thad Cochran's not shown any energy or push in this race. His presentation has been dim compared to Mr. McDaniel's. Was that what you saw down there? Because that was complicated by those odd stories about McDaniel supporters committing crimes or alleged to commit crimes. Since then, McDaniel's been much sharper. Has he got the advantage tomorrow, David?
Well, he definitely has the advantage. Don't forget, this isn't just a primary, it's a runoff. And typically in a runoff, if the incumbent gets caught in a runoff, the incumbent's in trouble, even if the incumbent finishes ahead in the first ballot, and Cochran finished behind in the first ballot. And I'd say this, Cochran, as you mentioned, was nowhere to be found during the primary. It's like they were trying to keep him in hiding and, just hope that he skates a victory on the strength of his name, and people have been voting for him for 40 years. It didn't work out. Since then, he's been on the campaign trail every single day, multiple times a day. He hasn't been in the Senate voting. He's been campaigning. I still think this is a tough road for him, and, they recognize it's a tough road, which is why Cochran supporters, from day one of the runoff campaign, June 4th, they've been running around trying to encourage Democrats who did not vote in the Democratic primary to vote in this runoff, which they are legally able to do.
Gentlemen, I want to turn to the White House because there's a new spokesperson for the White House, Mr. Ernest, who joins today. Welcome, Mr. Ernest. You are representing a White House that looks like it has a Jonah. Does everybody understand what that means? This is a sailor's term. It refers to, of course, Jonah and the whale, the Bible story. Jonah was thrown overboard because he was presumed to be bad magic, and they wanted to get rid of him. The storms, they were never going to make it to shore, so he was thrown overboard, and he was swallowed by a whale, and therein lies the tale. However, when you have a Jonah on board, it means that everything's going wrong for you, and you have to find out where the Jonah is and get rid of it. It's a superstitious sailor term. So, Mr. Fund, is there a Jonah at the White House? I could list what's gone wrong in these last months, but it continues. There are IRS hearings scheduled last Friday, again tonight, with Mr. Ice's committee, continuing with Mr. Camp's committee. The IRS can't prove that it didn't do anything because it's lost the emails from Lois Lerner for 2 critical years. Then we have the Secretary of State landing in Baghdad to support a Maliki government that no one likes, and the president much wants to disappear. And yet, unless and until we support the Maliki government, it looks like Baghdad and the rest of Iraq is going to be overrun by cutthroats. I will not go on, John. You get my point. Everything's gone wrong. Is there a Jonah at the White House? Your opinion, John.
A former Democratic congressman told me this White House is in a race between its firm desire to expand executive power beyond that of any previous president, to issue executive orders on everything that it can't pass Congress with, and its incredible incompetence in executing any of its powers. So it wants more power than any other presidency, and it's proven itself less able and less competent to deal with that power than any other president in modern history, at least since Jimmy Carter.
I allow for the fact that there's 5 months to the election and the Republicans are pounding the drums. That's the way you do it. You build a wave. At 2006, the Democrats did this magnificently. But David, I appeal to you. This seems an unusually long string of bad luck, bad decisions. Who could have guessed that 3,000 or 4,000 guys under black flags were going to take over half the country and threaten Baghdad? Who could have guessed that Ukraine would now be under the control of Vladimir Putin? And the president spoke with Vladimir Putin today for the first time in many weeks. And Vladimir Putin looks to be the Tsar of Asia. Who could have guessed all this? That's not Republican investigation. That's the Obama administration with a string of bad luck. Is there that question in Congress, David? Are people asking what's gone wrong at the White House?
Well, there are plenty of people that are asking what's gone wrong. I think in terms of foreign policy, I don't think anybody is attributing this to bad luck. I think Democrats are attributing it to a volatile, turbulent, and unpredictable world. I think Republicans are attributing it to the president's own foreign policy. And I want to attribute this to the writer who coined it, and I read it in a column the other day. Given all the executive authority the president wants to exercise, it's kind of ironic that the one area in which he has sole authority to do whatever he wants, he seems to tread extremely lightly, and that's foreign policy. And, some predicted that stuff like this would happen, and the president now has to try and work his way out of it.
Mr. Fund, your comment on the IRS, because this evening there's been television available through the websites of Mr. Koskinen of the IRS, who came on board, I believe, just after Christmas, since January, representing the IRS and the missing emails. The Republicans are pressing him very hard. The Democrats are playing brilliant defense, as they must. Is this a winner for the Republicans or the Democrats, John? Because it looks like a stalemate on television.
I think there will be concern about the IRS if more problems arise. Obviously, everybody is trying to bottle this up until after November. It's certainly true that this has not gotten anywhere near the media attention it would have in another administration. Mark Halperin, a noted liberal journalist who's been former director of ABC News, has written 2 books, Game Change, about presidential politics, said if this had happened in a Republican administration, this would have been a national obsession of the national media, leading the news and leading the front page every day. So I think what the Republicans have to do is the next step, which is, are they going to call people, IRS employees, to Congress, subpoena them, and force them to testify under oath? If they call enough low-level employees, I suspect we'll get more of the truth than we have now.
John Fund of the National Review Online and David Drucker of Washington Examiner, my professionals. When we come back, immigration. There is tragedy at the border. There's also policy failure by the Obama administration and Border Patrol. ICE is overwhelmed. The crisis continues. There are thousands of minors headed to the border. I'm told why. I'm John Batchelor.